Everyone, how's it going? It's your boy Atlas. Welcome back to the SMQB podcast. This week's show, we got 4 games to cover. Going into week 10, we got 4 games to cover from last week as sort of a week 9 recap. We got a new top 25 on the bottom of the screen, and we got a new top 25 to shit on, and that is the college football playoff one. It's actually not that bad, but there's definitely some objectionable things that we could talk about it, and we might as well talk about it first. Make the simplest thing happen first. I don't have a graphic to pull this up on your screen, but the college football playoff, the top 4 are Ohio State. Well, I should actually put them in order. Tennessee 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, Clemson 4, Michigan 5, Bama 6, yada, yada, yada. Some other notable... one second, I'm just going to pull up and make sure. Some other notable rankings. LSU's at 10. Just making sure. Yes, LSU at 10. Texas is number 24 on this one. I don't know. I don't get why Texas is on here. But that's not the super objectionable thing. I think they got a couple teams underrated. Not like majorly underrated because they're in a similar spot on my rankings. But I also think they have some teams overrated. I think the most notable thing to talk about here is kind of the disrespect that's being shown to TCU. Not that it's like oodles and boodles of disrespect, but it's an undefeated team that certainly has a better resume than Clemson. And they're ranked below a one-loss Bama. And I understand that, pedigree and like perception of a program influences rankings significantly. But I'll admit I've been a little harsh on TCU myself. But they should be above Bama. I'm not going to say that they should take the 4th spot. You can see in our top 25, our AMA top 25, got Michigan at 4. But I mean, last week it was literally TCU and Clemson at opposite spots. I've heard arguments for either side of because mainly the main distinction is like, why is TCU where they are when Clemson is where they are, and I believe TCU has played. How many? Okay, because I know Clemson's played 3 top 25 opponents, and I want to say TCU's only 1, but that doesn't sound right. I think it's 2. Yeah. Oh, and they played Oklahoma whenever they were. I think they were still ranked in week 4. Not that they, entirely should have been, but there's definitely been that strength of schedule argument that I've seen. And I think as a result of like the playoff committee trying to justify Clemson's position, they're keeping like people like Wake Forest, Syracuse, and NC State in their respective top 25s. When the most confident, like I can be fairly confident that Wake and Syracuse are top 25 teams. NC State is like number 26 or 27 for me. But are they, caliber-wise, good 2-loss teams? I think that's a discussion we just need to have with ourselves. Because I don't have a good answer for you. I think Wake is probably the better of the 2-loss ACC teams. But I don't know if I would inherently say, I know the rankings have it this way. I don't know if I'd take Wake over even an Oregon State, let alone any Big 12 2-loss school. So for me, it just doesn't make sense that Clemson's getting that number 4 spot. And it's like, even with, because TCU, let's for the sake of argument, say that TCU and Clemson have played equivalently strong schedules. we then have to look to see how each team dealt with those games. Clemson has been eking out wins against Wake. That was an overtime game. Against, Syracuse, they brought Cade Klubnik in, and if it wasn't for Syracuse drawing a blank in the second half, that's loss number one for Clemson. And then, I mean, the NC State game, that I guess that's kind of an outlier to that argument, but TCU, it was a comeback win, but they beat Kansas State. Although if you want to make equivalencies, TCU's K-State game is Clemson's Syracuse game, except TCU's more had a more convincing performance. Like, the offense is there. Offense is always going to be there with TCU. You don't know that with Clemson. But then Oklahoma was a smack. And then do we? Uh, yeah, TCU I think is just the better team out of the two. They've definitely had some nervy games. Um, I think West Virginia I think could have been more. They could have been more convincing with that one. Uh, but just with the teams they've played, I think I have to rate TCU's just ability to score points in their offense as just making them a better caliber team than Clemson. But as we kind of mentioned earlier with them being, or the whole caliber, the sort of perception uh, discussion around how that plays a role in where teams are ranked, I think this is just negatively impacting TCU right now. Because Clemson's another one of those schools with prestige. They're one of the blue bloods that have, I believe, 2 college football playoff wins. One with Trevor Lawrence, one with Deshaun Watson. I think that's right. Um, the only, well, I shouldn't say the only. The other thing I think's worth noting here is the fact they have LSU 10th. They're the highest rated 2-loss team. They're over Ole Miss, UCLA. I mean, those are 1-loss teams, but nonetheless, LSU's a top 10 school. Now, I've seen people argue that this is just the CFB committee trying to hype up this week's Bama LSU match down in Baton Rouge. Um, maybe that's a part of it. I was listening to the Joel Klatt show earlier, and he was talking about how the process works, and how they do it in sections. And because LSU has a head-to-head win over Ole Miss's only loss, since they have Ole Miss placed at 11th, they have to put LSU at 10. As much as I respect that argument, it's violated in other sections. I mean, by that logic, Utah should be one ranking above SC, even though I don't think that's what they should do. And then have things where like Tulane should be above Kansas State. I don't think anyone would, argue that, though, especially with how Kansas State tore apart Oklahoma State and Manhattan last week. So there's just examples like that. And it's, I don't know. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of it. But it's not, I don't think it's as egregious, because I think if it's a matter of how the format works and them creating it, and it's just kind of a glitch in the matrix. Or I'm relying my information off of Joel Klatt's podcast I listened to earlier. If that's the case, then it's not particularly bad. But also at the same time, I've been hearing some people say that these CFB rankings don't really matter. Like in comparison to like the AP poll, I I if they simultaneously say that AP rank doesn't matter, as much as I disagree with that sentiment, I'd be more inclined to like value that take because if you're because that sounds like an argument where it's like any given Sunday, one team against one team, ranking doesn't matter. One team will, if one team performs better regardless of rank, they'll win the game, right? Um, but I have a feeling that's not the argument that's being made. You can go beyond just the whole like recruiting side of it and marketing yourself as top 10 team in the country. Um, but in the case of like the CFB rankings in particular, beyond them being like the determining factor for the college football playoff, it also creates these sort of boundaries and conundrums on top of what the AP poll does when it comes to working out how this how it will turn up. How when we get to the new year, when we're playing these games for the college football playoff, who will be in them? Um, because with how it's structured right now, there is a SEC wall in that top 6 range. Not to mention like top 12. I think there's 5 teams in the top 12. Someone might correct me on that, but um, there with how it's currently set up, it is going to be very hard for a team like TCU, even if they go undefeated, to make it, because there's going to have to be some sort of justification for in people's minds for them to hop Bama, and I don't know if, like personally, I'm okay with that. I don't know if the establishment will let that happen. Um, but besides that, I don't like the prospect of 3 SEC teams in the college football playoff. And with how they have it ranked, there is a good likelihood of that. Because obviously Georgia and Tennessee play this upcoming week. We'll talk about that later in the show. And then the SEC championship is going to happen. The only thing that really derails this entire thing is if Bama loses again to a team not named Ole Miss. I want to point that out. Like if they lose to LSU. But even then, because the committee has LSU at 10th. That's actually just messed me up a little bit. Because it's not. Let's be realistic here. Bama's not going to lose to Auburn. Who else do they have? Do they have Mississippi State still? No, they just beat them like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, so they play Ole Miss this week. Wait, no, that's a lie. I just said they played out. Yeah, LSU, Ole Miss, a gimme game against Austin P, the Governors, and then end the season with Auburn. Wow, this actually is a bigger problem than I thought it was. You can look at me as being a biased Oregon fan here, sure. Um, the only thing we can hope for as an Oregon fan is that Georgia wins out. That's the only way we're going to get in. And even then, we might not even get in. Um, yeah, so Bama has to lose, but there's not a good loss. But I think I would prefer that loss to be to LSU as opposed to Ole Miss, because I think if it's like hypothetically a 12-1 Pac-12 champ, and you're going to put a LSU team over that, I think that would be ridiculous. Um, just but by nature of 2 losses, that they could go out and win the SEC. I don't even want to open that can of worms. If LSU somehow walks the rest of the table, wins the SEC championship, because they would be the ones who go if they beat Bama. Yeah, no, I don't like that idea. Just ugh, yuck, 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 yuck. But as for the SEC East, there's the thought that whoever wins this Georgia Tennessee game, well, they'll make it to the playoff. The team that loses won't. I don't think it's that clear cut. I think a one-loss Tennessee has a good shot. Um, but big asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. We'll have to ask the question of whether a one-loss Tennessee with a win against Bama on its record is better than, let's say, a hypothetical undefeated TCU or Clemson. I think on a merit discussion, you have to put the undefeated team in, and I would agree. I would love that shit. You know, maybe Tennessee fans would feel a little hard done. Um, but yeah, I don't really know. The whole idea of having three SEC teams just I don't like it. It's been floating around too much. Another reason that provides justification for the three teams is that Ohio State and Michigan play each other, similar to the whole Georgia Tennessee thing, and there's no shot that a one-loss big. I'm not gonna say no shot because the assumption is that the whoever wins this game goes to the Big Ten championship and just beats the heck out of whoever's in the Big Ten West that shows up, which I believe is going to be Illinois. I believe. And I mean, Illinois is a good defensive team. I just think they'll get. Well, I'm not gonna count my chickens before they've hatched. But at least that's the ongoing theory that whoever loses this Ohio State Michigan game is not going to get the chance to make it to the top four because they won't be in the Big Ten championship. Therefore, Clemson, TCU, even Oregon or UCLA or USC, whoever ends up out of the Pac-12, they will be the ones merited over Michigan. I think that wraps up what we needed to talk about in regards to the college football playoff rankings. Obviously, this up and coming weekend will have a lot of influence on what ends up happening. But before we talk about what's coming up, let's talk about what happened last week. So we covered 5 different games from the previous week. Also, we referenced a couple of other ones that I thought were noteworthy watching. Clemson, UCF. UCF pulled an upset there and now ranked 25th in both the AMA poll as well as the AP and College Football Playoff Bowl. I believe I said Eastern Carolina, BYU. Eastern Carolina won that. Trying to think, what other games did I talk about? Like as ones to watch, because I know what proper games we talked about. That might have been it. Although I will reference for a second that Miami, it took 4 overtimes for them to win last week against a less than Virginia. They're I can't even say like they're like Miami's 4-4, Virginia's 3-5. Like I can't even say Miami's that much better of a team because they aren't. It's just been disappointing with them this year in general. But let's talk about the games we want to talk about. We had Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Ohio State, Penn State. And we also did talk about Georgia, Florida. I don't know. Let's start with Georgia, Florida, because why not? Florida made this game interesting towards the end. Kind of it reminded me of the Arkansas Bama game from earlier in the season, but uh, I think it was a one possession game in the third quarter at some point. That's mostly due to uh, well, Georgia turning the ball over 3 times. I believe Stetson Bennett had 2 interceptions, and then there was a fumble mixed in there. Brock Bowers looked like an absolute goat when at the tight end position. Um, the only thing I want to add on to this game, because we predicted this correctly last time. Also, what is that extra noise that's happening in my headphones? I have no clue. Um, the extra thing I want to add onto this game is that if Anthony Richardson doesn't go down with, I think that was probably an ankle injury, um, earlier in the game. I mean, he comes back. Obviously, they gave him some. I mean, they probably gave him the whole vial of Advil in the locker room to make him able to play in that second half. If he's able to play this entire game, because he was effective, and Georgia has had issues with mobile quarterbacks. Maybe this game's a little closer than 42-20, but I don't know. I don't ultimately think that the Anthony Richardson being in this first half would remarkably change the game. Um, I guess some other things to talk about from this match. I mean, Georgia just ran the ball very well against Florida. It was also able to pass the ball pretty well, although I mean, it was the Brock Bowers show. I mean, that 73-yard touchdown, I think. Was that his touchdown? Certainly had a big old, like, 70-yard reception. Um, that's the highlight from the Georgia receiving game. But what I will say about this Georgia team, and I am getting a little bit ahead of myself, because I'm going to reference the Tennessee game coming up. I don't know if they're going to be able to score with Tennessee. Or at least a hypothetical Tennessee offense, because I think Tennessee's offense is better. I do not. So if the game comes to a shootout, it's going to be Tennessee that wins. But we'll wait to the preview, I guess, later, when we could talk about that a little further. Now, okay, Ole Miss, Texas A&M from last week. Man, Ole Miss almost made a meal out of this game, going into halftime losing, and then allowing Texas A&M to make things a little spooky in the second half. But, well, yeah, I needed to make sure. When Ole Miss is almost running for 400 yards on you, A&M, oh my good lord, that's a crazy number. Because I knew Judkins had like 205. I didn't know about the rest of the team. I mean, realistically, Ole Miss should have just smacked them a little bit harder. Um, and if the A&M offense didn't look like it was the best offense that they've had this season, I think it would have been a bit more gruesome. I think that's probably the more accurate word. Like if they put up a similar performance to the way they did against South Carolina. Yeah, this gets a little bit more out of hand. But Ole Miss is a spooky team. And I know they're not able to throw the ball close to what Tennessee can. But in that Tennessee-Bama game, it was Tennessee's ability to run that set up, the big plays. Ole Miss has a better rushing team. Just keep your thinking caps on, to see if Bama will be able to slow down this Ole Miss rushing team. I think they probably will. We're looking a bit too far we're looking 2 weeks in ahead for that one. But it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. I know this Texas A&M rush defense isn't anything formidable. That's still no excuse to that doesn't justify the fact that Ole Miss was able to get almost 400 yards of rushing on them. That's just bonkers. Final score 31-28. I don't know if I said that. But Connor Weigman, I don't know if he's German or not, looked very good. I believe he is a freshman. And he fills me with a little bit of confidence. I don't know if that's, the best word to, use when discussing someone on the offensive side in the Jimbo Fisher team. But let's just say I'm going to be less down on A&M going into next season if Weigman stays there. I guess that's the greater point I'm trying to make. We'll keep this one short and sweet for this next one. Kansas State, Oklahoma State, skull dragging. That is the only verb that accurately describes what happened in Manhattan, Kansas. Obviously, the Josh Pate went here for his weekly tour, every given Sunday tour or Saturday. Sorry, every given Saturday tour. I said in my preview that Kansas State's ability to win this game was going to be based on whether or not Adrian Martinez was starting. Boy, was I sorely wrong. Will Howard had an absolute amazing game. Like, maybe not blow your socks off, but like 300 for 4 touchdowns, not turning the ball over, QBR of 90. That's pretty good. The better part of this game was Kansas State's defense. Oklahoma State ran the ball 30 times. They got 54 yards. It is worth noting that their highest gaining rusher, Gunnar Gundy, ran for 27 yards. His long was 22. So, if you remove that rush in particular, 29 carries for 32 yards. This reminds me of Miami. Was it Miami who sunk so much of their offense into running the ball and then just did nothing with it? I feel like there's another example I'm forgetting right now where they just kept on trying to run and there's nothing happening. I mean, I'm also thinking of BYU Oregon, but I don't think that's the correct I don't think it's exactly the one I'm thinking of. I mean, Spencer Sanders, he didn't really do anything special either. Yeah, I did. I was kind of high on this Oklahoma State team, but Big 12 cannibalizing itself, and I think Kansas State, they have that loss to Tulane. I think Tulane's one of the better Group of 5 teams, and then they have their loss to TCU, where they just let TCU come back. I am excited to see this Big 12 championship game. I'm not predetermining who's going to be in it. I mean, Kansas State plays Texas this week. Not that Texas is a particularly scary team. I mean, they're scary when they want to be, but that's not every week. I would be very excited to see a TCU-Kansas State rematch. I'm just going to say that. If Adrian Martinez is back too, not taking anything away from Will Howard, but Adrian Martinez is a very good player. Next game. Another skull dragging, actually. Kentucky, Tennessee. Tennessee 44, Kentucky 6. I picked Tennessee to win in a close game. This was anything but close, unless you're talking about the first quarter only. Kentucky turned the ball over 3 times. I'm not saying that's the entirety of the story. But Kentucky passed the ball for 98 yards. He didn't even hit 100. Will Levis, people are still hyping him up like he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks out of this draft. I mean, I could be shit-talking him a little bit. He hasn't had like a crazy season. But, can you imagine if someone like a Jameis Winston... I don't even know why I even thought of Jameis Winston. Let's go with someone more recent when it comes to like if Trevor Lawrence had this sort of game against like a Boston call. No, that's not even a good comparison. Like Trevor Lawrence is even a good example because the ACC hasn't had anyone good outside of Clemson for a little bit. Okay, admittedly, this has been Will Levis's worst quarterback performance this season. But that being said, he's not hasn't been really good this season overall. I think he's just a bit too prone to throwing interceptions, just turning the ball over in general. Kentucky, they're just out of the conversation now. I don't think that was that their third? It was their second loss. I wish them, the best in their upcoming schedule because I am a fan of chaos. If they somehow beat Georgia at home, I'd love that shit. Actually, I wouldn't. I want Georgia to win out so Oregon can maybe make it in the top 4. Anyways, next game, because I don't really think there's a lot more to talk about in that Tennessee game. Hayden Hooker looked great. Tennessee just lit the Wildcats up. There we go. Last game to talk about from Week 9, Buckeyes, Penn State, and Nittany Lions. I know AGB was happy about this one because it's the first time we talked about Ohio State on this show. I think. Yeah, because I haven't really played anyone this year. CJ Stroud was throwing it all over the place. So was Sean Clifford. This game was... I don't want to say it was lost by Penn State. I mean, when you have a they had 4 turnovers to Ohio State 0. The fact that this game is a 2-possession game is wild to me. The fact that Penn State was leading in the fourth quarter, wild to me. I said this game was going to be close there, and I believe this snuck right underneath the spread. This Ohio State team is looking a bit exposable against a good offense. The defense has always been, maybe not the Achilles heel of Ohio State, but the worst out of their two, the two sides of the ball for them. Because their offense, C.J. Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver in the nation. Travion Henderson, he's great. But Penn State gave them a game, and I understand there's home field advantage involved, but this took all of Ohio State's strength in the fourth quarter to pull this game out. I'm interested to see what happens in the Michigan game coming up in a couple weeks. It determines the Big Ten East, but let's see if Michigan's offense is all that. Because, they haven't really played anyone particularly great either. They've played Penn State, and they beat Penn State a lot worse than Ohio State did. I don't really agree with comparative matchups like that. I think it's a good basis for something, but it's not the it shouldn't be the defining factor. Let's just put it that way. I guess trying to think what else to talk about. Anything else you want to talk about this game? I don't think so. Games for next week. We'll just hop right into them. You can see them up on the screen. First game we're talking about is actually a Friday game, and one I have not seen covered by a lot of media outlets. We have Oregon State 6-2, 3-2 in conference, going against Washington 6-2, 3-2 in conference. Oregon State's losses are against USC and Utah. Washington's losses are against UCLA and Arizona State. This game is up in Seattle. The current line is Washington State by 4.5. The reason I wanted to talk about this game is because I always find it interesting to talk about Oregon State cannibalizing itself. Not Oregon State only. Just the Pac-12 in general. This is one of those games that just determines the rest of the season for these teams. Because both these teams go to Oregon. Washington's the next week. Oregon State's the end of the year. And they're not completely down and out of their current positioning, because like Oregon State, I mean, obviously they play Oregon at home. They have this game against Washington. They have Cal and Arizona State as their other games. They win out. They are certainly in play for that second clinching spot for the Pac-12 championship. Same goes with Washington. Admittedly, these two teams have a difficult path to doing so. But nonetheless, it should be discussed. Looking at the resume of both of these teams, neither of them have been... There's not like a remarkable win for either of them. Oregon State's had some close ones. They did get beat down by Utah pretty bad, but they honestly, if Nolan, is it Christopher Nolan? It's Chance Nolan. If Chance Nolan hadn't, thrown for 4 picks, I think it was, against USC, they win that game. I believe they are playing with Ben Branson now. I think that's right. Yeah, Oregon. If Chance Nolan doesn't throw those 4 picks, they win against USC. This is a 7-1 team, and they're definitely in the top 25, even higher than they are right now. They're considered a top 25 team. Washington, they were ranked for a while. They were undefeated for longer than Oregon State was, as in I believe 1 week longer. But they were ranked a little bit higher because of their win against Michigan State, which we have now learned is a worse win than it was perceived at the time. Michigan State, I believe, was 11th at the time Washington beat them up. So it's a little interesting thinking about this matchup. In the sense that these are two teams that, if they win out, that is their only chance of making it to the Pac-12 championship. But they are still 2 good caliber teams. Like, obviously, Oregon State's ranked 23rd. In our AMA poll, they're ranked 23rd. Washington's, hanging around in that, 30th range by nature of being 6-2. So I think we got a good matchup here, and I think the line shows it, as well as it's going to. The question for me is whether or not Oregon State can score with Washington. Michael Penix Jr. on Washington, great quarterback. He's thrown for almost 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns. Not to mention, Washington has a pretty dang good receiving core. And if this game was in Oregon State or at Resource Stadium up in Corvallis, I would pick Oregon State to win this game. One, because of how pretty good Oregon State is at home, but also conversely, how mediocre Washington is on the road. But this is up at Husky Stadium. So I like Washington to win this game because admittedly, I haven't been particularly invested into watching Oregon State as much as I probably should have. I don't know how effective Branson is so far. I know he has a better stat line than Nolan at this point. But give me Washington to win. I'm going to say Oregon State covers, so maybe like a 3-point win. But I think this is going to be one of the more entertaining games of the week. Looking at like I don't know, like a 38-35 game. I don't know. Just a shot in the dark on that one. But if Oregon State goes up and wins this game, that's... Oh, we're going to keep things interesting at the end of the season. We'll at least put it that way. Next game to talk about. Probably the game everyone's talking about this week. Tennessee travels to Athens, Georgia, Sanford Stadium for, I believe it's the CBS afternoon kickoff slot. The line is Georgia by 8. I think I saw that line earlier this week up towards 9. Man, I've seen a lot of comparisons of this Tennessee team to Joe Burrow's LSU team from 2019. And just kind of their sort of offensive dynamism, being able to win the day against whoever they play. Not to say that their defense are scrubs, but their defense... I mean, it's by nature because their defense is out there a lot more because of, how quick Tennessee is playing, yada, yada, yada. This is I saw a post about this earlier, like just a kind of meme post, that this is actually a game you could market as number one against number one because Georgia's number one in the AP, Tennessee's number one in college football playoff. How's this game going to turn out? I kind of alluded to this earlier, and it's been talked about a lot on other shows, so I won't belabor the point necessarily. But this game is going to come down to Tennessee's rushing ability, being able to set up the big play with Hayden Hooker. Getting the ball to people like Hyatt, Jalen Hyatt. As much as my mind and to a certain extent my heart is telling me to pick Tennessee to win this game, I just think the home field of Georgia is going to win out here. We mentioned this earlier in the show. If it's going to be a shootout, which I don't really think it's going to be, hence why I'm not picking Tennessee. Tennessee wins in a shootout because Tennessee just necessarily outscores Georgia. However, if Georgia can limit Tennessee's ability to move the ball, and kind of just bully the time of possession game, Georgia makes this look like that, touchdown line or just a little bit over a touchdown line that it's at right now. One thing I will say, and I heard this point made by Josh Pate earlier in the week, is that if you slapped, a different jersey on this Tennessee team, like a Bama jersey or some other team that has, the pedigree of a blue blood college football playoff team, this line is not over a touchdown. I'm going to agree with that. So, give me Georgia to win, Tennessee to cover. But my upset alarm is just wailing right now. It's I don't it's This is probably the more plausible game of upsets to happen this week. I mean, I'm sure there's some other games down the list that are a little less noteworthy, that are like, oh, that's a good chance for an upset. And I guess you could maybe look at Washington, Oregon State that way, but we're talking high profile against two top 5 teams. This is where it's going to happen. And I mean, this game obviously has big implications for what's going to happen in the SEC East. Whoever wins is completely in control of their own destiny. Admittedly, I believe Georgia has a slightly tougher path remaining. Because I believe Tennessee's last games are against like Mizzou, South Carolina, Vandy, whereas Georgia at least still has a Kentucky game left. I'm just going to make sure. And they have Mississippi State. But they do have Georgia Tech. Okay. Balances out a little bit. If there's any sort of Tennessee Volunteer fan that's watching right now, don't think I'm trying to respect you guys as much as possible. And I think that it is plausible for you guys to be able to move the ball against Georgia. They're, as much as my Ducks got smacked to smithereens in the neutral Atlanta game, we were able to move the ball. Not score because, the game got out of hand and, we're going for it on fourth, yada, and, Tennessee's offense is better than the Ducks' offense. I have no doubt in my mind that this game's going to look competitive. But I just think Georgia's able to dampen Tennessee enough to the point that they can win maybe 34-28. Maybe we'll throw that score out there and see if it sticks. 2 more games to cover. We got LSU Bama coming up next. This line, I believe, is at 13.5 in Bama's favor. If I were a betting man, which I'm not, and I'm not suggesting any of you guys should bet, gambling is a bad addiction. Yeah, this is my PSA to you guys. Bama hasn't yet proven that they're a good road team yet. So until they do that, I'm just going to pick LSU to cover. As for who's going to win this game, it feels weird to say, but when it comes to performance this season, I almost like Jaden Daniels' performance better than Bryce Young's. And I know that's not entirely Bryce Young's fault. He's been injured. But Jaden Daniels has been looking better than a lot of people expected him to be, coming from Arizona State. With that being said, though, I don't like this matchup really for LSU. The reason I say that is because I think Bama can not bully ball run on LSU, but I think they will be able to run in pretty much any way they want to the point that they'll be able to control this game. Again, I don't think it's going to get up to a 2-touchdown deficit for LSU at the final of this game. Just, again, based off of Bama's ability to play on the road. But LSU has played... I don't know, I think about, a team's ability to run being a determining factor in this game. And then I look back to 2 weeks ago, because LSU is coming off a bye. I mean, Bama is as well. But LSU's game before the bye was against Ole Miss. That was an upset win for them. Ole Miss is that running team. Better than Bama is. I don't know. It feels like this is a bad matchup for LSU, but they can certainly prove me wrong. again, let's go 1 to 10. How am I feeling about this being an upset? Give me something like a 5. Let's say 6. Let's say 6. Um, but like if this like Sunday morning quarterback. If on Sunday morning I wake up, as Atlas does at like 11, a little bit hungover, a little bit TMI there. Um, when I wake up, if I didn't already know this Saturday evening, I look at my phone and I see, oh, LSU beat Bama. I'm not going to be surprised. Like I might be like, oh, wow, that actually happened. But I'm not going to be like, this is completely unobtainable. Like, this was completely coming out of nowhere. I can't believe it. I must now tell everyone. It's not going to be like that. But it's still going to be like, a nice surprise. And that's about a 6 for me. If you want me to throw a score on this, give me 31-21 Bama. Let's say that. Last game to talk about in our previews before I just give you guys like a little quick rundown of other games to look at this up-and-coming weekend. Wake Forest, NC State. I was talking about the Pac-12 cannibalizing itself. In this case, it's the ACC, and in this case, it's really who Clemson is beat. I think Wake Forest is the better of the two teams here. They're 21 and 22, respectively, in the college football playoff rankings. Wake Forest, I believe, is 21 in ours. They are 20th in ours, whereas NC State's unranked. Not that they fell because of a performance recently, although that Virginia Tech one certainly gave a lot of people pause. It's more that other teams are more deserving to be there than NC State. Wake Forest is favored by 4 in this matchup, even though it's Wake Forest going into Carter Finley Stadium. And I think that is justified. A lot of people are picking NC State here. I just don't think they have an offensive firepower able to do this. And I mean, credit to NC State's defense to a certain extent. Like, they're good. They'll keep an opponent to, let's say, under 30. The problem is that NC State's offense isn't able to match up with that consistently, especially against, Power 5 opponents. The most they've scored in the ACC this year is, I believe, 24 against would have been 22 against in that Virginia Tech game that just happened. All the other scores have been underneath that. They're just not doing anything particularly magical on offense, whereas they're going against a Wake Forest team led by Sam Hartman, who has been one of the better quarterbacks in the nation this year. Over 2,000 yards passing, 22 touchdowns, yada, yada, yada. Give me Wake. Give me Wake to cover, probably. I say this, but Wake just got smacked last week by Louisville. Like a not very pretty smacking, too. I think that, the Louisville game was mainly due to the, well, I thought this, the Miami turned the ball over against Duke, I believe, 8 times. Wake did the same against Louisville. So is this just going to be an ACC meme? If you're turning the ball over 8 times, yeah. You're going to get swacked. And I mean, especially when Louisville's putting up 35 against you in the third quarter. I do not expect Wake Forest to have another 8 turnover performance. So give me Wake Forest to win and cover. Maybe something along the lines of, let's say 30-20. I don't know. 30 to 21. Let's say that. So that's all of the previews, short and sweet previews that we got going on in particular for this week. Just to wrap the show up, other games. that you guys should keep your eyes on this weekend, as I think they might be entertaining for all y'all. Scroll. I mean, Florida, Texas A&M are playing one another. I don't think that's going to be a particularly entertaining game. Texas A&M's finally back at home, but I think Texas A&M probably goes 3-6 there. Baylor, Oklahoma. That's a game to look at. Wow. Texas, Kansas State. I'm just trying to think off my head now while I'm scrolling because I haven't found that game yet. I think that's about it. There's always an exciting week in college football, so I'm not gonna, there's never not an exciting week, and when you think there's not gonna be one, there is one. Maybe Oklahoma State, Kansas. I don't know if homie's back for Kansas. Who? It's Don't know if Jalen Daniels is back yet, but admittedly, I have not paid attention to them because they've lost 3 in a row. Jalen Daniels back? No. Well, who knows? At least it's a game to keep your eyes on. Any other things I want to point out? Here's actually a team that is like a borderline top 25 team that I just think people might be a little sleepy on. Maryland. Now, they haven't been winning games in spectacular fashion. Their 2 losses have been a 7-point loss to Michigan and a 2-point loss to Purdue somehow. And, they haven't really done anything particularly scary beyond that. But they are 6-2 nonetheless. They got a game at Penn State coming up. They host Ohio State. This could be a road bump team for any team that's, not thinking of what's coming ahead. I don't think that's going to happen to Penn State. I think it's more of an issue for Ohio State, considering they have Michigan the week after. I mean, I say issue. I don't think Ohio State's undisciplined enough to, overlook an opponent. But Maryland's something you should keep your eyes on. They play Wisconsin this weekend. With all that being said, time to wrap up today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you are new around here, subscribe, follow, and subscribe to all the other pages that we got on our channel. Mine, Mike's, AGB's. I've been trying to get their acts together so we can do a combined AMA sports show again. Because, I mean, there's interest to do it. It's just times haven't really been working out. But, yeah, beyond that, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care. It's been your boy Atlas, and this has been SMQB. See ya.